let's see, long range pronghorn antelope. That's just a ticket right there for my 257 Roberts, 100 grain Spitzer. Welcome back. If you stay with me, grab yourself a piece of paper and a pencil, and I'm going to unravel this mystery about bullet selection for you. The other day, I was going through some of the threads on one of the more popular blog sites for hunting and shooting, and I can tell he was a fairly young guy, just by the way he phrased things, but in the rest of his question. But his principal question was, which is better, the 150 grain 270 or 150 grain 3006? And not surprisingly, I went through page after page after page of answers until I really I ran out of energy. Nobody could give him a straightforward answer. Everything was thrown at him but the kitchen sink, and yet not one of the answers gave a clue to the real truth behind that question. The principal reason why I'm doing this series is to hopefully fill in the blanks that have been lost in the last couple of generations. I have to give my generation the dubious credit for essentially dropping the ball. I'm, amongst my sphere of friends, I got a lot of friends and acquaintances, and amongst my sphere of friends, there are really only a couple that have any interest, and that's only a passing interest in shooting, and they're of my generation, I should say. You see, when I was growing up in the 50s and throughout the early 60s, shooting was very popular. I've said this before in other series, shooting was extremely popular. It was a family-friendly activity. Nobody ever looked down upon anybody who was a shooter in the 50s or 60s. It was all over the place on TV. It was a culturally good thing. And people had their mahogany and walnut gun cases right in the living room or in the dining room or something, or in the den, but it was a public thing. People were proud to show their guns off behind glass doors. And nobody even had a thought that somebody was going to come in and steal a gun, because everybody knew that that was just a taboo. And youngsters in the house just didn't touch guns. The key was generally kept up on top of the top shelf, just simply so it was nearby, so Dad could open up the gun cabinet and show his buddies the gun and talk about it and clean them up and everything. And but the kids knew one thing that you did not do was climb up on a chair and grab a key and open the gun cabinet. You just didn't do that, and nobody did. I don't know of anybody who ever snuck into their dad's gun cabinet when he wasn't home. It was just not done. That was a rite of passage. To know that someday Dad would open up the gun cabinet and let you handle a gun at the appropriate age, that was something to be treasured. Well, just around the late 60s, unfortunate events that involve guns, notably JFK's, President Kennedy's assassination and his brother's assassination in 1968, Martin Luther King's assassination. Now, they were with guns, but it wasn't the gun that killed them. I'm a gun fan. I'm a Second Amendment advocate, but criminal activity was now being noticed that it was linked to guns. And way prior to that, I think around 1966, you had the Texas Tower Massacre, where an unfortunate event occurred where somebody went up in a tower and was shooting people down below with a high-powered rifle. Well, that ramped up the few people who were interested in basically killing the Second Amendment or taking away guns from the American public. So a great hue and cry went up, and in 1968 the Gun Control Act was passed. Now this might seem that I'm getting off point here, but my major point is that now that generation, my generation, suddenly started looking down on guns. Our fathers didn't. Our fathers just kept going out and going shooting and everything. But they became, you know, they became kind of a pariah to the general public. Nobody really wanted to know about anybody who was shooting. You know, just keep it to yourself and don't tell anybody, and let's not talk about it when, you know, when you come over or anything. So it became a dirty word. Most of my generation just simply stopped shooting altogether, or they didn't take it up. They saw Dad now as a clumsy dope that was, you know, going out with a gun, and they just didn't want to partake in that. Or they took up something a little bit more gentlemanly. Let's go bird hunting, and, you know, shotguns in some quarters became the acceptable gentleman's activity. But let's pack away all those rifles and stuff. So from that point on, from the late 1960s until very recently, really until just the last few years, I have to thank our current presidential administration for really re-inspiring people to take notice of their Second Amendment rights and to you know, plunge in and start getting interested in shooting again. But to quote Chester A. Riley from the 50s, what a revolting development this is. It's really kind of like, it's like a Planet of the Apes type of problem that we have right now. We've got a generation of people who really want to learn how to shoot. They really want to learn about the guns that they're now proud to own. But it's almost as if they're examining something which is from outer space. They really don't understand what's going on. And unfortunately, the industry that produces guns is playing into it. Whatever sells is fine to them. There's really been a loss, a huge loss of understanding about what constitutes the proper gun for the proper hunting activity, for instance. So let's see if we can make some sense about this. First of all, you know, throughout the development of smokeless powder cartridges, were really a turn of the century event. When I say turn of the century, I'm talking about turn of the 19th to the 20th century. Smokeless powder cartridges began to arrive on the scene, replacing heretofore black powder cartridges. Black powder cartridges of that era, of the late 1800s, were becoming remarkably efficient. They still could not generate the, you know, great velocities because black powder had limitations in terms of pressure before it became basically a small bomb. So there were certain limitations, but by and large, black powder cartridges of the late 19th century were actually starting to become pretty sophisticated. Brass cartridge cases had come onto the scene that sealed the chamber, that sealed the breech, and that kept any gases from escaping rearward. There was no more flash hole where gases could blow out and essentially ruin a gun. So the development of cartridge cases really was the vehicle that helped turn the page, and it did. Once smokeless powder was developed, higher pressures were able to be generated. More controlled pressures were able to be generated that were going up into the 40,000 psi range and things like that. And as the 20th century rolled on, very quickly, cartridge improvement ramped up very, very sharply. So by the time the beginning of the first decade of the 20th century had passed, we had really come upon some remarkably fantastic advancements in cartridge development and design. That's where you saw the development and design of the 3006 Springfield, which, by the way, just as a historical note, and I could go on about these historical notes forever, but the 3006 Springfield was developed on the 1903 rifle, well, the 1903 rifle was originally the 1903 cartridge, but then they changed the bullet weight, reduced the bullet weight to make it more compatible, or I should say more competitive with the Germans' reduction in bullet weight in their 8mm Mauser. So when they reduced the bullet weight, they changed the spin ratio and chamber throating and all that stuff. So then they went to a lighter weight bullet, higher velocity at 2,700 and something feet per second. And it became, they rebarreled all the guns that they had issued in 1903 to the military troops. And they rebarreled them and they became the 1906 variant. So, but that cartridge then became the 3006. But you see, that cartridge still lives on as one of the most, one of the most enduring cartridges of all time, and it's probably never going to go away in anybody's time in the foreseeable future. And from that cartridge was spawned many fabulous developments. Most notably, the 270 Winchester, I would say, is probably among the most stellar offshoots of the 3006. And there were other cartridges that were also developed of great importance of the time. Arthur Savage was developing his line of cartridges. He was starting to take advantage of the better burning rates of powder and things like that, and he had developed a beautiful rifle platform, the Model 99 lever action, which actually he presented it to the government for testing and evaluation. It was rejected because the military just didn't wish to have a lever action at the time. But it was a highly advanced system. It was a rifle that he had designed, but it was specifically designed around a couple of cartridges that still are considered a couple of the best deer rifle cartridges that were ever designed. It was the 250, originally called the 250-3000 Savage, a 25 caliber bore, and with an 87 grain bullet, achieved a remarkable velocity of 3,000 feet per second. And that was their advertising goal. They wanted to have a cartridge that would spit out a bullet at, then that was the unheard of velocity of 3,000 feet per second. A 90 grain bullet wouldn't make it, so they made it an 87 grain. They just trimmed it down a little bit until it got out of the barrel at 87 grain bullets at 3,000 feet per second. So it became the 250-3000. And that same length receiver also accommodated what he designed in a 30 caliber cartridge with ballistics that were almost right on the button with the existing, at that time, the existing 3006 military cartridge at just under 2,700 feet per second. So it was right on the threshold of the 3006 with a much shorter cartridge. I'll show you in just a second. Hold on. Okay, here's the 300 Savage. Now, you know, it looks like a rather truncated version of a 308, and that's exactly what it is. Or I should say, the 308 is a elongated version of the 300 Savage. When the military decided to upgrade in the early 50s, when they decided to upgrade the Garand platform and make it the M14, with a shorter cartridge length, with the improvement of powders and all that stuff, they realized that, you know, the 300 Savage was able to perform at the same velocities that the 3006 was performing at, same virtual velocities that were very desirable for military use. But the cartridge had too short a neck that wouldn't feed quite right up into the chamber without the bullet actually bending in the cartridge and sometimes loosening. Now that's kind of a funny turnaround, because you know, a few years later, when they were designing the 223 to be used in Stoner's platform, the 222 Remington Magnum case was too long and it wouldn't feed up, it would get jammed, so they had to shorten. So in one case they lengthened the 300 Savage and changed the shoulder angle a little bit for correct feeding into a 308 chamber. and in the other case they had to shorten it to achieve the same end. But all these developments the ballistics of cartridges were designed around the need. First of all, you have a need, then you design a cartridge that fits the need, then you design a rifle that fits the cartridge. That's the proper way to go about it. What we've got, unfortunately, now, and I see this with several developments, is we've got a rifle platform, and I'll say it, we got an AR-15 platform. Well, what can we stick in it that will fit? And then after we get that to fit, what can we shoot with it? That's where we are right now. It's a illogical way to go about things. The M16, the AR-15 platform, was designed in collusion together with the cartridge that was going to. They were both designed together as companion components. The rifle and the cartridge were one. They didn't seek to design a rifle and then try to figure out what cartridge would fit in it. It just was not the way they were going about it. And so that's not the way to go about it these days either. When somebody was designing a deer cartridge, they knew that there were certain parameters that had to be met. I want you to remember this term. It's not something you're going to find on the box of most ammo that I know of, and it's not something you'll even find on a box of bullets. But sectional density. That's sectional density, and you don't have to remember this formula or anything because it's not necessary to figure it out. It's already been established for every bullet weight that's being made. But sectional density is the ratio of the bullet in weight per pound. So naturally, bullets don't weigh a pound, but it's a fraction thereof. It's a fraction of the pound. It's ratio to the square of its diameter. So if you have a 30 caliber 150 grain bullet with a say a 308 or 3006, 300 Winchester Magnum, whatever it is, 300 Savage, the sectional density of a 150 grain bullet is 0.226. If you were to figure it out, if you were to figure out the sectional density of any given bullet, you'll come up with a number with a 3-digit number behind a decimal point. So with a 308 with a 150 grain bullet, it's 0.226. With the weight of a bullet changes by its length. If the caliber of the cartridge, if the caliber of the bore is the same, the only way you can increase the weight is by changing its length or changing its alloy. But generally speaking, changing its weight is the only way you're going, by lengthening it, is the only way you're going to really achieve any difference in sectional density. Because lead is the most, it's the least expensive of the densest metals. Nobody shoots gold bullets or anything like that. So in order to maintain the same sectional density with a solid copper bullet, which is becoming required in some parts of the country, or bullets which have thicker jackets which are lighter than the core, those bullets become increasingly longer in order to maintain the same sectional density. So what is sectional density? Sectional density is the driving force behind a bullet. If I took this box of bullets full and dropped it on my foot, it would hurt, and but it wouldn't cripple me. But if I were to take this weight right here and put it in a hammer and drop it on my toe, I might go to the hospital. It's all because the weight is concentrated in a smaller cross-sectional area. So that's what sectional density is. sectional density, sectional density is always something which gives a bullet a greater potential for penetration. Now, the actual penetration is affected by other factors, such as its frontal area, for instance. The frontal area of a bullet, as the frontal area expands and it blooms out into a mushroom, or the petals open up, or if it simply bulges open, whatever the reason is, when the frontal area is increased, then the sectional density is basically decreased as it goes through the mass. So a bullet that starts out at this .256, a 150 grain bullet that ends up at 256, by the time it blooms out and it's say 45 caliber in diameter at its frontal area, the actual sectional density now has decreased tremendously. But those are all known facts, which have been established through what we call in shooting knowledge by tradition. Well, this is where only a collective memory can assist. You know, if you have a person of my generation who has a connection with the past, with the person who handed down the information from before, you have handed on application of a science that is through tradition and knowledge. You can't. An old friend of mine used to say, "Fools figure, but figures don't fool." You cannot shoot enough bullets into clumps of magazines, or into ballistic gelatin, or into water bottles, or anything like that, and come up with what any skilled hunter, knowledgeable hunter, over the years has amassed by simple experience. Experience is always the best teacher. Science sometimes falters in that regard. I'll give you an example. In my young days, right after I graduated from high school, I was an electroplater. I was a precision electroplater. I worked for a company that made coaxial connectors for the aerospace industry just outside of Boston. And in the plating trade, what I was taught to do was to set a rectifier, a DC direct current rectifier, and to run current to the anodes and the cathodes of the plating tank, and the parts hung from the anode bar in the solution, which was usually something extremely poisonous. It was cyanide, such as silver cyanide, or caustic sodas, and anything, whatever would generate a current, acids. And I was taught by my boss how to set the rectifier for a certain number of parts. It was something that was just passed on to me. He'd tell me, for these parts here, first of all, I had to just simply ask him, Bob, what do I set this at? And he'd look at the batch and he'd say, well, you got so many hundreds of square inches. Set the rectifier at 50 amps and give it 45 minutes. Well, he just knew that. He was something that he knew. He was the chemist. He was the industry. He was the company head of the plating department. He just knew this stuff, so he passed it on to me. And I remember one day, a couple of engineers came down from upstairs, and I'm in my white T-shirt with pockmark holes in it from chromic acid that I'd eaten through, splashing around, and I got my Dynel pants on, so my pants didn't get destroyed when I was leaning up against the tanks of acid and stuff. And so, and the place stunk to high heaven. Everybody told us, we got used to it, but the place stunk to high heavens, and the fans roared and all this stuff, and the rectifiers had a incredible hum. But these two engineers came in with their ties on and their shark skin suits and everything, and they immediately walked over to the plating tank, and one of them just asked me, how much time you giving that? And I don't know what the answer was. I said I'm giving it, you know, like 45 minutes or something. It's still got another 20 minutes to go. He said, I want you to just turn the rectifier. You got the wrong amperage. He said, set the rectifier to 120 amps and just and finish up the job in it'll finish up in another 5 minutes. I said, yes, sir. I knew exactly what was going to happen, but I walked over the rectifier and I turned up the dial. It went, and it really started humming. It basically, the rectifier is nothing but a big welding. They were actually welders. So all of a sudden, this thing started humming like crazy, and the parts started to fizzle, and you could see the amber solution, which was a silver cyanide solution. That solution all of a sudden started to really fizz like it was Alka-Seltzer, and I knew what was happening underneath. Well, I said, sir, I said, you know, let me just show you what's happening here. Well, I picked up a hook, and there was not, the hook, the copper hook that I picked up off the bar had no bottom. It just simply had the rubber. It had the rubber coating where it was protected from being plated, but the hook was gone, and the part had basically burned off and was at the bottom of the tank. All the rest of the parts were like that. So several $100s worth of parts just simply became toast and crumbled into, they incinerated in the solution. This was because he was applying science where experience is the rule. He was very embarrassed by it. He didn't say anything, he just simply left, and there was nothing I could say to him because obviously he was from upstairs. He was one of the people up in the grade upstairs where, you know, everybody was, it was like the Godhead up there. Everybody just simply did whatever they told us to do. But the same thing is occurring right now, I see, with shooting. We're getting some absurd solutions to questions that have never been asked. We're being presented with a constant array of new cartridges that are being designed to fit into an AR-15 platform that may certainly have some viable merit for an assault team, you know, in Iraq or something like that, at close quarters combat. But this sort of notion, that's the extent of it. And you notice that the military is not quick to pick up on some of these new designs either. They might be somebody's brainchild. It's a very popular thing right now. For gun writers have to, before they do anything else, they have to establish a legacy by having a cartridge named after them. You know, there are certain absolutes that are known, and to try to get off of those absolutes is like going a few miles north of us, where Mount Washington. You know, people every now and then decide they're going to wander off the Appalachian, the network of Appalachian trailways that are going up to the summit of Mount Washington. When they wander off, they die. You can't wander off the path. When it comes to shooting, you can't wander off the traditional knowledge that had been established about shooting, lest you get into areas which are going to get you. Basically, you're going to have less than you need. Sectional density. Let me read down the list. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this in 2 videos because there's a lot of material to cover here. But let's see if I'll run down. These are some of the most well-known deer cartridges of all. These are all cartridges which have always brought home deer. Nobody has ever complained in the least about their ability to take down deer and to take them down efficiently and reliably with a well-placed shot. And as of all things have to be well-placed shots. But these are cartridges that can be depended on to shoot a deer at any angle that he presents himself, and that's key, because a good deer cartridge does not rely upon an ideal broadside shot or an ideal frontal shot or anything like that. An ideal deer cartridge is capable of winnowing its way through bone and flesh and sinew until it gets to the vitals from any angle. and from any depth. So here's the traditional known cartridges of that ilk. 243 Winchester, the 253,000 Savage, the 257 Roberts, 6.5 Swede. Now I'm not going to mention all the different cartridges right now because like the 260 Remington is the 6.5 Swede in American form. That's all it is. They're kith and kin. The 270 Winchester, 7mm 08, 30-30. Now the 30-30 has been derided by so many people over the years, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why there's an exception to the rule. There's the 300 Savage I mentioned earlier, the 308, the 30-06 Springfield, and the 32 Winchester Special, which falls about in the same classification as the 30-30, but again has always performed admirably on deer out to its reasonable range of 100-125 yards. I'm not going to go into bullets of larger diameter, because bullets, when you get beyond 30 caliber in diameter, the rules about sectional density can become a little bit muddled, because now you're dealing with a bullet with much greater mass, frontal area. Now, and certain cartridges kill simply because they have great mass and great frontal area. I'll give you a classic example. If you take a 458 Winchester Magnum, it's a hefty African round that has taken countless thousands of game in Africa, and not too many complaints about it. The only complaint about it is that it's not particularly far-reaching. But for the type of game hunting that it was always designed for, which was for fairly close range, up to 100 yards of dangerous game, it was more than adequate. Now that 458 bullet, 500 grain bullet, is traveling at about 2,200 feet per second from the muzzle. Well, that's the velocity of the 30-30 at the muzzle, and the 32 Winchester Special at the muzzle is about 2,300 feet per second. So it's not, you're not killing by velocity. You're killing simply by large frontal area impacting a lot of mass impacting the target. So that's where sometimes when you get above 30 caliber, as the ramp starts to go up and the bore diameters become larger, velocity becomes less significant, or I should say sectional density starts going into a different realm. So instead of being a deer cartridge, this is why an 8mm Mauser is really, you're getting into a 32 caliber bullet with an 8mm Mauser, and when you're driving that at 2,800 feet per second, such as the military round that the Germans used, that cartridge is now really hot on the heels of being a elk cartridge. So, but let me read off the sectional densities. The 243 Winchester, 0.242. The 250 Savage, 0.216. Now I'll call that one marginal. One of the issues with Ned Roberts, the reason why Ned Roberts designed his 257 Roberts was because he wanted to increase the potential of what was then a pretty well known and pretty good cartridge. The 250 Savage was a great cartridge with the 87 grain bullet, but when it went into a 100 grain bullet, it was just a little bit marginal on long, ass end shots on deer, because the bullet just sometimes didn't penetrate enough. It was the correct cartridge for the patient guy who was willing to take his shots only when they presented a perfect target. But again, a good deer rifle shouldn't have to wait for a perfect presentation. So, but the 257 Roberts with a 117 grain bullet is 0.253. It's a huge improvement. So it went from 216 to 253. The 6.5 Swede, fabulous cartridge for deer, 0.246. The 270 Winchester, 0.242. 7mm 08, 0.248. The 300 Savage, 0.226. 308 Winchester, same thing with the 30-06, 226. Now, you notice that as we know that those cartridges were all stellar deer cartridges. Nobody should ever claim that the 308 or the 3006 or the 7mm 08, for instance, are inferior or in any way marginal on deer. They're ample on deer, trust me. But a bullet sectional density of 0.226 is down somewhat from the higher sectional densities such as the 243 of 0.242 and with the 257 Roberts of 253. You see, the designers of these cartridges knew what they were dealing with. They knew that they had to design bullet sectional densities. The penetrating capability of a bullet had to be designed in mind with the game in mind, with the deer in mind. They used to shoot through carcasses and stuff to see just what would go on. They would take deer cartridges, carcasses, and shoot through these deer. And of course there was the collected evidence of hundreds of people who just simply went afield and verified this stuff over and over again. But people like Ned Roberts and all these people years ago, they had a collective wisdom about what was necessary for the deer hunter, and they designed the cartridge to fit the critter. That's the way things were done. They didn't design a cartridge and then say, gee, I wonder what I can shoot with this thing. In virtually all cases, most of the cartridges that have been designed, with since the AR platform, they're really straining at the bit when it comes to bullet efficiency. You can take a 308 and it's a great deer cartridge with a 150 grain bullet, or anything beyond that it's a great deer cartridge. But when you stick a 130 grain bullet in it, it suddenly becomes a varmint cartridge, because the bullet simply does not have enough driving energy behind it in order to reach the vitals from the longest shot through the stern end after it struck a hip bone or something like that. These are known quantities. So when you try to establish a cartridge which is traveling at meager velocities at 2,300 feet per second, or 2,400 feet, or even 25, and you've reduced its sectional density down to what should have been a varmint weight bullet, you've got two bad situations going on at the same time, and you're taking pot shots at deer. There's just, I'll probably get more thumbs down on this video than on any, but I'm sorry, but you can't change the laws of physics. You might, and anecdotal evidence means nothing. Anybody can kneel beside a deer with his 22 Hornet standing there, and he can say, well, 22 Hornet, I shoot deer with a 22 Hornet. Well, everybody knows that poachers have gone out into the woods out here at night and have poached deer with 22 Hornets so that the game warden doesn't catch them. These are guys that go out, with spotlights, and they shoot the deer between the glowing eyes. Well, that does not mean that this illegal activity verifies these guns to be deer rifles. Everybody knows that that's a ridiculous presumption. But sectional density numbers always should be adhered to. Where do you get these sectional density numbers if they don't appear on a box of bullets or on a box of cartridges? And remember, a box of cartridges and a box of bullets are two different things. A bullet is to a cartridge as flour is to a loaf of bread. They're not the same thing. This is a component. So if I have a box of bullets, and I want to know, or I should say, if I'm looking to buy a box of bullets, and I want to know what the appropriate bullet is. Now I recommend this is my highest recommendation. It doesn't make any difference if you've never got any interest in hand loading, if you're never gonna assemble one cartridge in your entire life. Everybody who hunts, everybody who likes to shoot, should have a hand loading manual. And hand loading manuals have much in them besides simply data for hand loaders. they give you all that valuable information that you need to know about particular cartridges. You can read about the cartridges. You can read about the fabulous performance of different cartridges through the years and things like that. But if you look in, for instance, every bullet maker has their own manual. But if you look in the Hornady manual, for instance, it'll show you the different bullet styles, and you can also get these. You can get these in a simpler form. You can get these in a leaflet form, so you don't necessarily have to have the whole book. But I prefer to have the book because it just gives you the stories of all these cartridges, their histories, and everything like that. And there's nothing better. There's nothing better than a picture. You know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So you got the picture of the various bullets. You got the weight, the ballistic coefficient, sectional density, and what they're usable for. In other words, what is this bullet designed for? There's been the problem that has started to crop up recently is that writers are starting to lose a little bit of their honesty, and sometimes that applies to the gun manuals as well. Some of the gun manuals now, I think that the bullet manufacturers themselves, they don't want to corrupt their name by giving bad recommendations. So they hire somebody who's a gun writer or somebody who's known in the field to write a blurb about a particular cartridge, and you know, if he makes some stupid comment, then it's all on him. And there's some stupid comments made. Unfortunately, it's just one of those things that has been developing, and you know, when nobody knows, it's that old story about the emperor who came out of his palace and paraded down the street showing off his new clothes. He was stark naked. He was stark nude, and the whole crowd was told he was wearing his new clothes, and so they all waved and they shouted, you know, that they loved their emperor and everything. And there was only one kid in the crowd who yelled out, "Hey, you got no clothes on." Well, that's what's going on now. There's an awful lot of that going on. We've got people who are now promoting the 300 blackout. To me, it's the 300. So what? You know, I mean, you got a 30 caliber bullet that's stuck into the end of a 221 fireball case. A 221 fireball case is a foreshortened 222 Remington, which was designed for a handgun cartridge. It was a 10-inch barreled XP100 pistol with a 50 grain 22 bullet in it, and that was a varmint cartridge. Now we're sticking 30 caliber bullets in a 221 fireball case. It looks absolutely asinine. It looks like a 38 special with a point on it. And it doesn't even have the diameter of a 38 special. And people are kneeling beside game animals, hogs that they've shot with this. Well, I can tell you what, you're not going to catch me going out into some woods someplace with a critter that can chew my leg up and shooting at him with a 300. So what? It's the most ridiculous concept I've ever come across. And when you start stuffing it with 200 grain bullets at subsonic velocities, which are below, 1,025 feet per second, now you got a cartridge that doesn't even come up to the same potential as a 44 Magnum. Everything now has gotten completely hysterical. People want to just simply, I applaud it. Everybody wants to shoot. It's not the kind of shooting I really profess. I don't profess that anybody should just simply shoot willy-nilly. They should learn to become good marksmen. As Americans, we should become the very best marksmen in the whole world. We have the right to do that because we have the only stated right to bear arms. So I want to talk more about bullet design and ballistic coefficient and things of that sort in the next video. But if you want to just write down, this number, again, 242, 253, 246, 248, 226. If you want a deer cartridge, make sure that the sectional density is at least over .226 if it's a 30 caliber bullet, and if it's less than that, you want to have a little bit more. You want to have sectional densities of up to 242, 246, 252, things like that. And you're going to be in good shape. You're going to have a bullet that's going to get home to the boiler room under any circumstances. We'll talk about velocity later, because the pairing of velocity is the other important component. You can only have you can only have a platform that will take deer down. So you want to have velocities, working velocities of upwards of about 2,900 feet per second for a good deer cartridge, and no less than, generally speaking, 2,600 feet per second for a good deer cartridge. At the muzzle, I'm talking about muzzle velocities, and we'll talk about terminal velocities in the next video. So remember those numbers. You want to have in excess of .226 sectional density for bullets in the 30 caliber region, and you want to have for bullets of smaller diameter, the 25s and the 6 millimeters, the 243s, you want to have bullets of about 240 sectional density. And again, don't be exceeding. You don't need to exceed the muzzle velocity of about 2,900 feet per second, because then you start getting into hyper velocities that will start destroying meat at very significant levels. So stay tuned. We'll come right back in the second video. God bless.